Hello and welcome to our ninth and last lesson. Congratulations, first of all, you made it to the last episode of our journey together. And in this last episode, we'll be speaking a little bit about the Sufi orders, how Sufism has been organized and institutionalized through the centuries up to the present day. And how Sufis have interacted with society and also with politics. And in the end, we'll be speaking about the perennial message of Sufism and why it is relevant for the present day. So I welcome you to again listen with your full attention and from your heart to receive and enjoy this last class. So let's speak about the Sufi orders. The Arabic word for a Sufi order is, as we already said, tariqa. And tariqa comes from the word tariq, which means a path, a narrow path, as opposed to the Sharia, which is the broad street, kind of the highway of the believers. And when we use the word order in English, it has, of course, a strong Christian connotation. You have the monastic orders in Christianity. So does this word really fit the Sufi context? It does in some way, because just like in Christian traditions, the Sufis also have rights to initiate members into their orders. And the word order, of course, implies a group of people living together under a common spiritual discipline with the goal of spiritual maturation. So in that respect, it fits. On the other hand, there are some important differences, one of them being that Sufis, when they enter an order, they don't necessarily have to leave behind their normal daily lives. Many of them even still have a job. They might be shopkeepers. They might be, cooks or whatever. And they don't have to leave behind their married lives as well. There is no celibacy, as it is usually the case with Christian monks or nuns. And in Islam, in Sufism, there is no central authority like the Pope in the Catholic Church. So the first Sufi order, I'll be using this word, the first Sufi order is the proto-order of Prophet Muhammad. Well, it was not an institution as such, but we can speak of a proto-order of a kind of very first group of like-minded people, of Muslims, that gathered around the Prophet and practiced whatever he told them to practice. Then in the early years, the early centuries after the death of Prophet Muhammad, you find slowly those groups that start to call themselves Sufis. Even before that, you have the word Zahid, and a Zahid is an aesthetics. So you have these movements of detaching yourself, of practicing asceticism, fasting, retreat, eating little, sleeping little, and so on, as a reaction to the worldly character of the political dynasties, especially the Umayyad dynasty in the 7th and 8th century, which was the caliphate that followed the Muhammad and the first caliphs from among his family and his companions. So you have this dynasty located in Damascus in Syria, which takes on a very worldly form. Wars happen, capitalist system, we can almost say, actually exactly what Muhammad tried to fight against in his own times is repeating itself. So you have those people that oppose this direction and that take themselves out, and they are called the Zahid or Zahidan in Farsi, the ones who practice asceticism. Later, after, I would say, the year 1000, more and more you find that they call themselves Sufi, and the element of love enters Islamic mysticism. So now the emphasis is more on cultivating that divine love, as opposed to the dry and frugal asceticisms of the early years. From the 11th century onwards, Sufism grows into a major social force, and Sufis begin to organize themselves in orders all around the Islamic world. And they found residential institutions to train aspirants. And those institutions have different names. In Arabic, you often call them zawiya, which means corner, in fact. In Farsi, they are often called khanqah or dargah. And in Turkish, they are usually called tekke. These centers, these institutions become training places for Muslims, mystical-minded Muslims. And in those years, from the 11th, 12th century onwards, Sufis also play an important role in spreading Islam. For example, in India, what is today India and Pakistan, whole regions, especially in the north of India, in Kashmir, but also in the south, in areas like Kerala, people convert to Islam because of the charisma and the influence of Sufis, who walk and wander through the lands from village to village with their songs, their poetry, their stories, their teachings, and people are impacted and decide to embrace Islam. So Sufis also play an important role in spreading Islam. It's not only through war and through the sword, as it is usually seen, that Islam was spread. No, in India, actually, it is more through these wandering dervishes. So this is how Sufism spreads to the frontiers of the Islamic world, namely to Spain, Andalusia in the west, and northwest Africa, to Central Asia, and to the Indian subcontinent. So let's speak a little bit about how these Sufi orders, which became more and more influential, also in the realms of traditional Islamic learning in the madrasas, the Quranic schools, Sufis were welcomed, especially in Iraq, in Baghdad, which became a very important center of Sufi learning, and in different places of Persia. And also then at the prestigious Al-Azhar University of Cairo. So let's speak a little bit how these orders were organized. And how they were functioning. There were different levels of how people engaged with the Sufi orders. If you became an initiate of a Sufi order, in some cases, that meant you left behind your previous life and you moved into that sacred place, into the compound, into the dargah, under the full-time instruction of a master. In some cases, maybe your family would also move with you. But there are also more loose engagements with ways of engaging with Sufi orders by merchants, ordinary people, by the rulers who would regularly visit Sufi ceremonies or consult Sufi masters whenever there were important decisions to take, or when you had an important dream that you needed help with to interpret. So Sufi masters played all these different roles. And as we know, Sufis have the ideal to stay engaged with the affairs of society. So typically, Sufi orders are not kind of closed off spaces, but there is a very fluid and dynamic interaction happening with the outside world. And Sufi lodges were visited by people from all classes and walks of life. Some orders had strong ties with the ruling dynasties, whereas other orders were very careful not to engage or not to meddle into politics and not to accept also any funds or any endowments by the government. Rulers, on the other hand, in many areas of the Islamic world, they sought to engage with the Sufi masters because they understood, first of all, their spiritual powers, and also they knew how and what a reputation those masters had in society. So they also tried to create that bond, that connection. Let's take the example of Turkey. The Ottomans, basically for almost five centuries, had a strong connection to different Sufi orders, especially the Mevlevi order. And through the centuries, the Ottomans even established a bureaucratic system of managing the shrines and managing the Sufi orders. For example, shrines and Sufi orders did not have to pay taxes on the condition that the attendants would pray for the welfare of the rulers. That's a nice exchange. And the descendants of Sufi orders or prominent disciples of the Sufi orders would often go on and hold positions in government offices or even rise up into a ruling position. And also some of the sultans were actually disciples of important Sufi masters. These entanglements between the Ottoman state and the Sufi orders was one of the reasons why the founder of modern Turkey, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, came to officially outlaw Sufism and close down all the Sufi orders in 1925. Modern Turkey was founded in 1923, and 2 years later he closed down all the Sufi orders, forbid the ceremonies, including the Sema, the whirling ceremony. And in 1927, Rumi's mausoleum in Konya, which was for almost for more than 600 years, almost 700 years, was a place of spiritual education and now became a state museum. Most of the Sufi orders are named after one central founding figure. The word Mevlevi, for example, comes from the name of the honorific title of Rumi, Mevlana. The Shadiliya, an important Sufi order in Morocco and Algeria and other North African countries goes back to Abu al-Hassan al-Shadili, or the Naqshbandiya, which emerged out of Central Asia, goes back to Bahauddin Naqshband, whose tomb is in present-day Uzbekistan. So those central masters and figures codified and institutionalized their teachings and the practices of their order. So the Naqshbandiya, for example, they have a very distinct way of practicing Sufism. They call them the silent Sufis because they are more into retreating. They don't chant their zikrs aloud. There is more like silent meditation. The Mevlevi order is known in Turkey to be more like an intellectual order. So people with a high education, very much fond of the arts, like calligraphy, like music. And then you find other orders with other different emphasis, each of them having a specific taste that that matches a certain personality type. Also, you find in certain regions of the Islamic world that certain orders are more prominent. For example, you have the Nematullahiyya in Iran, which is only special to Iran. Or you have other orders that only exist in the Ottoman areas. For example, the Bektashi order. And within each of the main orders, you also find that with time, there have been many branches going out. And sometimes you have composite orders. For example, the Jerahi Halveti order in Turkey. When a great Sufi master or a saint dies, often, typically, you would build a shrine around his grave. And those shrines still today are important pilgrimage centers in the Islamic world. You can find them in almost every Islamic country. And in a way, the blessing power and the reputation of the sheikh becomes even much larger after his death. Those shrines, they exist from Malaysia, Indonesia, in the east of the Islamic world, all the way to Morocco and Andalusia in the west of the Islamic world. And now let's look at some of those shrines that I've visited on my journeys. This is a shrine located in the old city of Marrakesh called the Medina in Morocco. It's a dark space. Beautifully, the light is falling in through the windows. And it's a typical Moroccan shrine with a crafted, ornamented wall and a very peaceful place. Here, people come to pray. Sometimes they may ask blessings from the saint, or maybe mothers ask to give birth to a child, or sometimes businessmen come to ask for abundance in their work, or just for spiritual inspiration. Here is a photo from a Sufi shrine on the outskirts of Istanbul. It's the tomb of a saint, a local saint called Akbaba. And it's an open air shrine. Again, it's frequently visited by groups. Here it seems to be especially women. And this is the shrine of the famous Bayezid Bistami in the town of Bistam in northern central Iran, which is now located out of an Imamzadeh. Imamzadeh is a kind of a Shiite, a Shia pilgrimage place. This gentleman sitting there with his turban is probably from the Turkmen areas of northeastern Iran. Yeah, looks like as if he's time traveled from a distant era. And in some cases, like here in Morocco, the shrines have become so important that towns were built around them. So those shrines are not only important spiritual centers, but they are also important centers for a local economy. So you have pilgrims lodges, you have people who sell souvenirs, you have restaurants, you have hotels, and all these things to meet the needs of pilgrims. I'd like to also show you another place, which is the shrine of Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti in Ajmer in northern India, probably the most important Sufi pilgrimage center in India, which is visited by thousands of pilgrims every day. At the Urs, or the death anniversary of the saint, this place, maybe I'm not exaggerating if I say that millions come to visit. And it's, by the way, not only the Muslims, but also Hindus and Sikhs come in great numbers because they recognize Muinuddin Chishti as one of their saints as well, and they seek his blessings. So here is a Qawwali ceremony, which is held in the precincts of the shrine. And you see the singer with the harmonium and his band clapping in the traditional Qawwali style, and pilgrims sitting around and enjoying the music. And as you have seen, lots of bakshish for the musicians. So let's look a little bit at what happened to the Sufi orders in the modern age. I already mentioned that Ataturk closed down the Sufi orders in Turkey. And this is a trend that happened throughout the Islamic world, also in other countries. For example, in the Soviet republics, for obvious reasons, Sufi orders were outlawed in the places that are now the Central Asian republics like Uzbekistan or Tajikistan. So Sufi orders have encountered resistance and pressure for different reasons. Coming from the secularist perspective, the Sufi orders were perceived as an obstacle on the path of modernization. And from the fundamentalist Wahhabi point of view, they are seen as un-Islamic. So funnily, the result is the same. It doesn't matter if it is Islamic fundamentalism or secular materialist fundamentalism. Both are two forms of fundamentalism in a way. In Iran, Sufism has been marginalized and persecuted. Sufis have been persecuted, especially now in the last years in the Islamic Republic. The only Islam that is, let's say, legal is this political, narrow version of Shia Islam. But of course, Sufism still exists and lives in the soil of this land. It's not easy to undo centuries and centuries of Sufi culture that has flourished in this soil. For example, in the past years, I've been doing some research, field studies in the northeast of Iran, in the area of Khorasan. And I've come across this beautiful old man called Bismil, who spent his life as a simple farmer and entered the Naqshbandi path as a young man and completed his journey as a Sufi and became what we might call enlightened. He's already in his 80s, close to 90, but on a daily basis, he receives visitors, and his path or his spiritual work is through sohbat, through spiritual conversation, and through just being himself. A very simple man with a very beautiful smile, with incredibly piercing eyes, and just through his presence, through his simplicity, he has changed the lives of many people. This is Bismil in the border areas of Iran and Afghanistan. So on the one hand, you often hear talk about the decline of Islamic civilization and the decline of Sufism, and how hard it is nowadays to really find a functioning Sufi order and a real master. And certainly there is truth to this narrative. But I also like to remember what the female Sufi teacher Hayat Nur Ataran in Istanbul told me. She's from the Mevlevi lineage. I asked her, what do you think when Ataturk closed down the Sufi orders in the 20s? Wasn't that a catastrophe for Sufism? Didn't something die at that point? And she said, no, it's impossible. How can you close down the human quest for wisdom? How can you ever shut something like this with a decree? It's unstoppable. So wisdom will always find its ways, and those ways might be different nowadays than at that point. So some people also see it as a necessary step in the evolution of Sufism, saying that the traditional conventional orders and the conventional modes of teachings belong to the past, and now we live in a period of opening up and of spreading the wisdom in a more, let's say, non-hierarchical way. And we can see that in Turkey nowadays. There is a renaissance. People are getting more and more interested again in Sufism. You have bestsellers written by Sufi teachers. Sufi teachers are invited to talk shows. During Ramadan, you have Instagram live sessions on all kinds of topics related to Sufism and spirituality, of course, also mixed with other teachings like Buddhism or practices coming from India. And you see in many countries in the Islamic world how Sufism is visible through foundations, schools, in companies, in the media, and even in some cases, Sufis have formed political parties, for example, in Pakistan. Let's speak a little bit about the role of women in Sufism. In fact, many women in the history of Sufism played an important role in teaching Islamic law, Islamic spirituality. Women funded and founded mosques and madrasas. There were important saints, for example, Sayyida Nafisa, who is a descendant of the Prophet in Cairo, who had great knowledge in the esoteric sciences. And you can find many Sufis who had women as their teachers. For example, Ibn Arabi often speaks about the women who taught him, who initiated him into Sufi wisdom. Rabia of Baghdad, Rabia al-Adawiya, is almost an archetypal figure in early Sufism. And that shows us that in terms of spiritual capacity, of course, women and men are absolutely equal. They have absolutely the same, are bestowed with the same means of reaching the divine. And even some Sufis say that women are ahead of men because they are more receptive to the spirit, more receptive to the divine. Rumi calls the woman a ray of divine light. And in another poem, he says, the woman is more creator than a created being. Ibn Arabi also often speaks about the high spiritual state of women. And in his philosophy, he speaks about the male and the female principles, the yin and the yang um, of the divine that take part in this cosmic dance. And for Ibn Arabi, the feminine element is even more preeminent because all things emerge out of that quality of divine love, of Rahman. So the feminine element plays a very big role in Sufi spirituality. Out of the 15 disciples of which to which Ibn Arabi gave initiation, 14 were women. This is very significant. And Ibn Arabi wrote a whole collection of poetry dedicated to a woman he was in love with. Her name is Nizam. He was a young Persian woman whom he met in Mecca. And Nizam, in this poetry, in these beautiful love poems, becomes the perfect mirror image of the divine. Ibn Arabi saw in this woman a perfect revelation of the divine on earth. But because of patriarchal structures existing in Islamic societies, women saints and women figures in Sufism, unfortunately, similar to Christian history, were generally marginalized, and their stories were omitted from the collections of saints' lives, the accounts of saints' lives. For example, in Konya, you have a shrine of a saint called Tavus Baba. But actually, Tavus Baba is not a Baba, Baba meaning father. It should be called Tavus Anna because it was actually, this shrine actually belonged to a woman. But in order to conceal that fact, people called it Tavus Baba. So you have these stories in many places around the Islamic world. Let's read a poem for a change. It's another poem by Ibn Arabi, and one of my favorites, and probably his most famous poem. My heart has become capable of all forms, a meadow for gazelles, a monastery for monks, a temple for idols, a Kaaba for the pilgrim, the tablets of the Torah, the book of the Quran. I profess the religion of love, and whatever direction its mount may take, love is my religion and my faith. What do we see in this poem? We see how Ibn Arabi has transcended the boundaries of his own tradition and has reached a state where he embraces everything, where his heart has expanded to such a degree that everything can fit into the heart. All the traditions, all the expressions, all the manifestations. Islam actually from the very beginning has this kind of openness. Yes, the Sufis and the Muslims are convinced that Islam is the last revealed religion and that Muhammad is the last prophet. But at the same time, the Quran states in the 5th surah that there are many, many paths to the divine. It says, to each of you, we have given a path and a perspective in the 5th surah. Or in the 10th surah, the Quran says, for every community there is a messenger. In fact, the Quran speaks about 72 prophets. And according to one hadith, there are even 124,000 prophets. Now, no one has ever counted them. I think this number is probably more like a symbolic number to show that there are prophets in all cultures and in all lands. So that's why also many Muslim scholars recognize Buddha, Zoroaster, and even the Indian avatars as equal to the prophets mentioned in the Quran. And not only the Jews and Christians are considered as people of the book, but many Sufis have also acknowledged, for example, that Hindus are among the Ahl al-Kitab, the people of the book, regarding the Vedas as divinely inspired scriptures. In another hadith, it says, we prophets are all sons of the same family. Our religion is but one. I think it's not in hadith, it's actually a verse from the Quran. And another Sufi called Ibn Hazm said, place your trust in a pious person, even if he does not share your religion, and distrust an impious person, even if he is of your religion. And I think that's a very important point to really say that being a Muslim is not about being a member of a club called Islam, but it's really about leading a virtuous life and about seeing the divine everywhere, about surrendering to the divine. And that is a state, and you can reach that state in any religion, in any spiritual path. So with that perspective, Sufis always, and also today, have been keen on interacting with mystics of other faiths. The first ascetics of Islam were deeply influenced by Christian hermits, and it is said that at Rumi's funeral, there were people of all faiths present. The Jews were chanting the Psalms of the Torah, and the Christians were proclaiming the gospel when Rumi's body was carried through the streets of Konya. And after that, the Sultan of Konya called the leaders of the Jews and the Christians and asked them, why did you do that? Why were you honoring a Muslim in that way? And they responded, when we saw him, when we saw Maulana Rumi, we realized the true nature of Jesus and the true nature of Moses and all the other prophets. He was our Jesus. He was the Moses of our times. So that's when you reach this kind of a state of maturity, you obviously transcend all boundaries. And that's what exactly Ibn Arabi was pointing at. There is another famous quote by Ibn Arabi that goes like this: take care not to tie yourself to a particular creed by renouncing all the rest. May your soul be the substance of all beliefs, for God is too vast and too immense to be enclosed in one credo that excludes all the others. So the deeper someone goes in his own religion, the more he or she will be able to see the oneness of all paths. Whereas if someone remains only on the surface of his or her own religion, he would not understand other beliefs and even maybe try to impose his own beliefs on other people, which is unfortunately what we see so much nowadays in the world. This call towards unity that Rumi and Ibn Arabi have voiced is not the shallow syncretism that we sometimes see in modern times, just flatly saying all is one, but it's an expression of a spiritual realization within a certain path. So we need to understand that Rumi and Ibn Arabi are deeply rooted in the Islamic tradition. And Ibn Arabi was studying the Quran and the Hadith until the end of his life. So what he was clearly a follower of the Prophet Muhammad. But from within that tradition, from within that lineage, he expanded. I also want to speak a little bit about how Sufism came to the West. We nowadays have a wide number of Sufi orders and Sufi groups that are active in Europe and North America. And this presence of Sufism in Europe actually already goes back to the Ottoman times, when the Balkans were ruled by the Ottomans. So we still find historical tekkes in places like Bosnia, Albania, and Macedonia. In my native Germany, for example, Sufi poetry was already discovered in the periods of classical German literature, like Goethe or Ruckert. They were important German poets who were interested in Sufism, and Goethe especially being an admirer of Hafiz. So we have these interactions going back to several centuries, and we see in the 20th century masters who traveled from the Islamic world and settled down, especially in North America, particularly in the Jarahi and in the Mevlevi traditions. And also the Inayatiya order that was founded by Pir Inayat Khan in the 1920s, who is a teacher with origins in the Indian subcontinent from the Chishti order, who settled in Europe and then spread his movement in North America, where it is now a very important Sufi order, a modern Sufi order that has many followers. So Sufism has inspired Westerners in different ways. Some have become Muslims and have entered the path fully under the guidance of a sheikh. There are other lineages like the Inayatiya, which don't require, and also certain branches of the Mevleviya that don't require their followers in the West to become Muslims. And then there is the other point of view, which stresses the universalist character of Sufism and doesn't require people to become Muslims. So we have all these different perspectives. There are others who have been inspired by Sufi ideas or incorporated certain elements of Sufism, like the whirling or meditation, into their own spiritual practice. And for others, Sufism has helped them discover elements they lost in their own religion, because being an alive, sacred tradition, Sufism has helped many Westerners discover what they have lost to materialism and to modernization. So Sufism makes available a body of spiritual teachings that has become less available in the West since the Middle Ages, since the Renaissance. But of course, there are also challenges when Sufism comes to the West. First of all, we have a very different culture compared to the context in which Sufism emerged in the Islamic world. And also, there is always the danger of Sufism turning into business. Modern consumerist culture transforming Sufism into something that is sold on the global spiritual marketplace. We can see that in the way Sufi groups are exhibited to attract tourists or customers, even in the Islamic world, in tourism, in Turkey, in the whirling ceremonies, or in North Africa, among Sufi groups. Sufism, in all this confusion of the modern world, can play an important therapeutic role and can help people gain access again to that essential wisdom that lies in all of us. At the same time, it's challenging for youth in many Islamic countries nowadays to really find access to the original tradition because it has been marginalized, as we said before. And there is always a balancing act here for Sufis nowadays to at once remain truth to the essence and also adapt to the times we live in. And this is, of course, an ongoing challenge, especially in places that have been influenced by modernization, by European and American ideals for the better or the worse. And that's the case in almost every Islamic country nowadays. So how can Sufism serve us today? Like all the spiritual traditions, the Sufis say that we should take full advantage of our precious human life. To take this opportunity of being in a human body and wake up to our full potential, to our full reality. That opportunity will not always be there, and every breath might be our last one. As the Prophet Muhammad has said, you need to learn to die before you die. And there is another saying of the Prophet, man is asleep, and when he dies, he awakens. So Sufism is an answer, is a path for those who want to wake up while they are still in this body. And especially in our modern times where we tend to get lost in a rat race, where we worship material gains and material goods, where we also worship newness, it is important to remember the ancient wisdom, to remember the wisdom of the old. And Sufism is such a path that has continued to exist until the present day. Contrary, I would say, to what happened in most of Christianity, Islam still has that very authentic wisdom. Still, it's accessible and still it can be found, even if it is more difficult than it used to be in the past. So sometimes you hear that religion is something that belongs to the past and that we should overcome, and that it's not relevant anymore, that we need now new ways, and we need to somehow discard all those old systems and old beliefs. Yes, there is something to this argument. On the one hand, times are changing, but on the other hand, I feel that the purpose of religion is still the same today as it has been in the past, because fundamentally human nature has not changed. Our deepest needs are still the same. Our needs of finding meaning in life, of discovering happiness, true happiness, and of facing the reality of death. These questions and these needs are the same for men and women today as they were in the past. And those are the questions and those are the needs that Sufism and that spiritual Islam deeply helps us address. So despite all the enthusiasm about modernity, about science, technology transforming our lives nowadays, the inner technology is still the same. And it's that inner technology that in modern times we have greatly neglected, and that is what has taken an immense toll on our world today, that has led us into so many different crises, so many different wars, war with ourselves, war between cultures, between nations, and war with nature. Sufism is a way that can lead us back into peace on so many levels. It's a cure for our modern illnesses. So Sufism is not dead, I would say. It's not some kind of medieval phenomenon that existed in the past. It might be more difficult to access because there is so much clutter, so much confusion in our times. But at the same time, we can see that the teachings are now so readily available throughout the world, through the World Wide Web. So it has also become more easy to enter the path in some ways. And great saints are continuing to appear. Great saints still live among us and are there to guide us and to take our hand um, to, to make us reconnect to who we really are. So, my sincere hope is that this course has given you moments in which you remembered who you are. Maybe it has inspired you. Maybe it has given you an inkling of uh, the immense potential inside of you. It has certainly helped me remember um, what my heart sings for and what I want to dedicate my life to. And please accept my deepest gratitude for um, giving me the opportunity to share all this with you. And I would like to end with a quote from Rumi's Fihi Ma Fihi. In man, there is a love, a pain, an itch, and a desire such that if 100,000 worlds were to become his property, he would still gain no rest or ease. These people occupy themselves thoroughly with every kind of craft, skill, and position. They learn astronomy, medicine, and other things, but they do not find ease, since their goal has not been attained. After all, the beloved is called heart's ease, since the heart finds ease through him. So, how could it find ease and peace through others? All these diversions and goals are like a ladder. Since the rungs of a ladder are no place to take up residence, but exist only so that you can pass on, happy is he who quickly comes to himself and to awareness. Then the long road becomes short, and he does not waste his life on the ladder's rungs.